is nice. I totally understand if you don't. But if you're not talking, I will ask you to put your microphone on mute. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for another community conversation. Today, we have a very timely conversation about recent tragedies that have happened in the Black community. And today, leading our conversation are Dr. Nadabonya Mabachi and Dr. Elizabeth Monks. And I want to read you a little bit about them. So Dr. Mabachi is an assistant professor in the Department of Family Medicine at KUMC. She is in public health, both in academic and community settings, using her expertise in health communication and community-based research and qualitative methods as well, to evaluate and to address a variety of topics, both in campus and in East Africa. Dr. Mabachi employs an equity and empowerment philosophy in her work. Her goal is to work in partnership with communities and organizations and empower them to address health issues in ways that are most meaningful and sustainable for them. Areas of focus include prevention of mother-child HIV transmission in ways to engage with health partners, community-level assault prevention and policy change, and improving cervical cancer screening and treatment. Dr. Mabachi also conducts medical education research designed to address health inequities arising from the hidden curriculum and implicit biases in care provision and decision-making. So that's Dr. Mabachi. Thank you, Dr. Mabachi. Our second, the second person guiding our not study. See, you got me saying study, Dr. Mabachi. Guiding our conversation today is Dr. Elizabeth Monks. She is an assistant professor of psychology at KUMC in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. She is a licensed psychologist in the state of Kansas. Dr. Monks' clinical work is specialized in cancer, and she's a faculty member with the Oncopsychology program at the NCI designated University of Kansas Cancer Center. She earned her doctoral degree in clinical psychology from St. Louis University. Dr. Monks has done research and clinical expertise in diversity-related topics, minority psychology issues, and multicultural competent practice. She co-chairs the Department of Psychiatry's Diversity Committee and also serves on the KU Medical Center's Diversity and Inclusion Cabinet. Currently, Dr. Monks provides clinical services to cancer patients and their caregivers with expertise in presenting concerns and challenges with patients in the KU Cancer Center. Other individuals that I do want to acknowledge on our call today is Officer Azandi Garlington, who is a Metro Police Officer, and also Captain Robert Gibson, who is a KUMC police officer. So before we get started, I just want to make some recommendations to all of us. Let's embrace this crucial yet courageous conversation. Let's have an open mind. Let's listen to one another with empathy. Let's have responsible responses. Let's end on a positive note, and let's be socially accountable. With that being said, I will hand it over to our leaders for today.
Great. Thank you so much, Jerry Lynn, and thank you everyone for attending. When Elizabeth and I were talking together about leading this community conversation, we honestly didn't know if we were up to it because we feel everything that has been going on, and I think it's emotional for everybody. But we thought this would be a great opportunity for Elizabeth to talk a bit about some of the psychological factors that we should be thinking about or maybe occurring because of these events. And then maybe I can talk about some of the more practical things that we can do as individuals and as an organization as we navigate these times. So Liz, would you like to start?
Sure, definitely. And I don't know how much time we want to spend. I mean, initially when Geraldine asked us to lead this discussion, we were just kind of getting through several events with Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and Travis Miller. And I'm gonna guess that people are probably familiar with those cases. Ahmaud Arbery was a 25-year-old who was killed jogging in Georgia. Breonna Taylor was killed during a police raid in Kentucky in her apartment. Travis Miller was a delivery man who got blocked into like a gated community all African Americans. If there is a need for more like information or facts about the cases, let us know and we can talk more about them. But I'm assuming if you're all here, you're probably familiar with the cases. And then I feel like it started raining and then it started pouring, and we had events from yesterday to kind of add in. I know when Geraldine emailed me yesterday, I was like, I can't do anymore with the Floyd George case and then the Central Park incident. So lots to talk about. 50 minutes is not a lot of time. So I think Natty and I were kind of like, let's say our piece. I'll talk a little bit about the psychological impact. And Natty's going to talk a little bit about social accountability. And then we really want this to be open discussion. And we also have, I think we're very lucky to have, two officers that can hopefully lend some, some information, some clarity, be helpful. I think we can all be open and talk, and that will hopefully be a good thing. So from a psychological standpoint, I was really happy to talk to Natty in planning this discussion, because I felt like I needed an outlet. And as a psychologist, I can say personally, I'm feeling the psychological effects that I know we are reading about and consuming in the literature. And I think the big thing that I wanted to convey was the idea of vicarious trauma, which I think a lot of people are probably familiar with. It's indirect exposure to violent events that causes emotional distress. Emotional distress that's just as difficult to manage as though you were the one experiencing the trauma yourself. Vicarious trauma is well known to therapists, first responders, social service workers, journalists, other professionals whose jobs require basically empathically interacting with trauma survivors. But research has shown that, especially in the African American community, that the types of events that we have been seeing, and especially with, I guess, being able to visibly see with recordings and things like that, where we're getting more exposure to specifically African American males unarmed that are killed, that is a vicarious trauma for the African American community. And that's seen very regional, where the emotional distress is higher. So we would see maybe more emotional distress in Minneapolis or in Georgia, where those things are taking place. But I think when you get this cumulative nature of these kinds of events happening sort of back to back to back, where you don't have a chance to recover from the last one, it becomes an even heavier emotional load. I think it's probably not surprising that research shows that for African Americans specifically, rates of depression, anxiety, and fear increase after events like this happen. And so, I mean, I'm not surprised by that. I'm feeling that. I'm sure lots of people are feeling that. But the psychological impact of these types of events is serious. It's significant. It's something that I try to pay attention to in the clinical work that I do. Cancer is usually the focus because I'm a cancer psychologist, but cancer doesn't happen in a vacuum. And many of the people that I'm sure we're interacting with, whether it's in a clinical way, in a research way, in a friends and family way, are dealing with heavy things right now. So with that being said, I'm also happy to send out, some of the research articles that document some of these things if people are interested in reading more about them, because I don't want to take up a lot of time talking through what seems to be pretty, I think, understandable that these types of events have an impact on the mental health of the Black community. And I say specifically the Black community. There's a recent study that shows that for white Americans, it's not that there maybe isn't necessarily an emotional impact, but it's definitely higher for the Black community, which I think we probably understand why that is. So you know, what do people think? How I feel like a very stereotypical psychologist in saying like, how is everybody feeling? But how is everybody feeling? Like for real, how is everybody feeling? What are people feeling the emotional effects? I also know that with trauma, numbness is a big response, and I'm sure the emotional rainbow is very full with lots of different emotional reactions. So I think Natty and I also wanted this to be a place where people could talk and express and just use this as a safe space to say what they want, ask what they want, express themselves. So how are people doing?
Well, I'll go first. This is Geraldine. You know, I'm not doing well with it, honestly. You know, it's a heartbreak. It's frustration. There's so many emotions tied up into one. I worry about our Black men who it almost feels like many times that they're being hunted. And so I know that each of these situations is very unique, but you know, while we have Captain Gibson and Officer Garlington on the line, I really would like to hear from them and their thoughts about how they're feeling with being in law enforcement and also being, you know, Black males. So I would like to hear from them. Captain Gibson.
I think what happened yesterday in Minneapolis has set us back further. We were just getting a couple steps forward. Now we're taking a couple steps back. But it's. I hate looking at the video. What happened yesterday in Minneapolis and everywhere else. It's a black eye in my profession that I'm not proud of. I constantly have to defend my profession on a weekly basis. But it's something that I took on and I'm used to at this point. But as things keep happening in the community, I keep hearing it from my friends and family and just in general conversation with people on the streets who find out what I do and they ask me questions on how I feel on these types of things. So I try to avoid it for the most part because I want to make sure I got my facts straight on what's actually going on. I haven't felt it. So it hasn't impacted me as being profiled in any way. Most people thank me for what I do, and they understand I have a job to do and really don't give me too much grief about it. But it's just a sad day today of what happened yesterday, and I've watched it twice and I don't want to watch it again. So I hope that the FBI who's investigating it looks at it thoroughly and comes up with their own conclusions. Everybody can Monday morning quarterback this, and the whole world is. I didn't know about it because I was doing other things yesterday. I found out about it on Instagram. Then I had to go to CNN and all the other news outlets to find out exactly what happened because the photos were posted, just that one photo. Then all the videos started coming out. So that's kind of where I'm at with this whole situation right now.
Thank you. Z, what about, can you speak to what happened with Ahmaud Arbery back in February? And we just actually found out about it a few weeks ago with being a police officer.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's just very devastating, especially as a black male, a black man who is a police officer. To see that, it's heartbreaking, and you know, to be, I don't know, on both sides, because I'm a police officer and I'm a black man. To see other officers, and I'm speaking about the incident that just happened. To see that as a black man, it was very, very hurtful to see officers behave that way. Like the captain, I mean, I get a lot of questions, a lot of things, and you know, did they do this the right way? Did they handle that the right way? and we don't know all the facts of what happened. We can only go by what we've seen, what the video, what we've seen. But it's heartbreaking, and that's one of the reasons I got into law enforcement, is because I wanted to do a little bit of a change of what I can in my community. And like the captain, I mean, I haven't been profiled or anything because I am a police officer, but you do still get certain looks that people look at you and they're probably expecting you to behave the same way those other officers do, because it's a shame that when, as a police officer in the police department, one or two things wrong that a police officer would do, and everybody looks at the whole as if, you know, that's how we all behave, and it's not. It's really, there's some really great officers out there who care about people and care about the community. But I believe, you know, going through the police academy and things like that, I mean, officers are trained a certain way, a different way. But there needs to be a training on how to communicate with people, because as an officer, when you go into a situation, you have to assess that situation so quickly, and it's hard to do. It's hard to do at times because you have to make a snap judgment on how you should handle things. And most of the time, officers, you know, they're protecting themselves and protecting those around them. But I mean, it was definitely uncalled for from what I've seen. What the two officers did.
Cell phones are our worst enemy right about now because everything's being recorded.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Everybody
everything.
Monday morning, they all Monday morning quarterback everything we do. Even if we're doing it right, and if we're doing it right, we're still going to get judged. And
absolutely,
that's where we are.
I totally agree with you. And it's sometimes it's hard to do your job because you know that you are being recorded, and you know, and so you have to play back, you know, everything that you've learned. And sometimes even in those situations, those things, as they go out the window because situations arise, and it's like, okay, how do I handle this, or how do I do this in this incident? But just because these two officers, three officers, four officers, and these other officers who have unjustly killed Black men, I mean, it doesn't set the precedence for all officers, because there are some good officers out there who are trying to help out in the community and set a great example. We just have to hold these people accountable for their actions. And I mean, with the young man who was jogging that day, I mean, there's a lot of things that are being said, and I don't know all the facts and the things of what happened. But I know that the way that it was handled, it could have been handled a lot differently. And how these three gentlemen followed this young Black man and tried to stop him because they thought he was, you know, robbing the place. And I guess before then there were other people who were going into this house, and it was being recorded. But I think a lot of people just hurting. The community is hurting, whether you're Black or you're white. I think all people are hurting.
I agree.
And we're trying to figure out how to deal
right
with this situation, because as a black man who has a family, and you want to raise a family, you know, nowadays when I was coming up, I wasn't taught how to handle myself in front of an officer. I had to learn that. And so I think we need to be educated on how to deal with the police when we're stopped. Mm-hmm. How to deal with it, you know, because I see a lot of young Black men that they already have the wall up. So when they get stopped, immediately they put that wall up and they argue with you. And that's the wrong way to handle that, because as an officer, you shouldn't go into that with whoever you're stopping, but it's like the level of intensity keeps rising between the two people, and we need to teach our young men and women how to deal with that when we're stopped or when we're approached by an officer, how to handle that.
Azandi, I agree, and that's the reason I wanted both Captain Gibson and Officer Garlington on the line today, because I wanted to have a variety of perspectives. But so I agree that 100% all police officers are not bad, black, white, whatever, not all are bad. But, you know, I wonder because Captain Gibson, you said that the cell phone is our worst enemy. Is it our worst enemy now? Or is it actually helping to shed light on things that have been happening in a community for a very long time?
Both. It's both. I mean, they're capturing what they need to capture. And if the officer is doing wrong, then that falls on them and their department. If they're doing something right, there's a lot of things are done right that aren't being pushed out to the communities. From what I usually see, it's always something negative. There are some good things that are pushed out, especially when an officer gets out the car and throws a football with someone or plays basketball. Those get pushed out. But there's a lot of times that I see police officers. I'm not in the streets anymore. I'm more in my office. I'm not even in uniform. A lot of our guys will be on a call, and you have somebody in their face with this camera, and that a lot of times will the officer will use poor judgment because they know they're being recorded and they'll make a mistake. I see that happening too as well. So no, you're getting good and you're getting bad, but for the most part, you see a lot of negative things that are out there. I would like to see more positive things that are being done that are out there. I see people recording a lot of good stuff. It's just not being pushed out.
Okay, I would like to now hear from some of our those of you who are online with us, your thoughts about what you've been hearing so far, and the thoughts about what have happened with Ahmaud Arbery back in February. We just found out about it a few weeks ago. Also Breonna Taylor, who was killed in Louisville, Kentucky, and then Travis Miller, who was delivering packages in a gated neighborhood, and he was stopped trying to leave the neighborhood. He was stopped. And then George Floyd, who was murdered the other day in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I would like to open it up to hear your thoughts. And then Dr. Mabachi, we will definitely come with you so we can talk about how we can be socially accountable.
Hi, Geraldine, it's Lynette Sparkman-Barnes from Castling. Hi, Elizabeth, and hi, Natty. I'm listening to the conversation. I'm going to have to get off in just a few minutes, but I just wanted to make a few comments. And the officer was saying about holding people accountable. And I think that's one of the frustrations, and that's part of the trauma that we continue to experience, is because as African Americans and other people of color, even things that are on the cell phones and videos, which you think would say, hey, somebody's going to be held accountable, have gone, and people are still not held accountable. And so I think I'm sitting in this space of who's supposed to hold who accountable when obviously the legal system does not hold people accountable. And that's not just happening because of what's happened to these tragic deaths right now. This has been going on throughout history.
It's been going on for a long time.
Absolutely. And as far as educating people on how to deal with the police, and you were saying, officer, that you weren't taught that growing up. I know, I mean, I'm a Black woman married to a Black man, raised by a Black father, and I know tons of Black men specifically who were taught that, but still Black men are dying. Geraldine, you used the phrase it seems like they're being hunted, and I'm just going to say it, they are being hunted.
They are.
I just want to, Lynette, thanks for speaking up about that, because I had just when Officer Garlington was talking about like educating, people about how to interact with the police. I think that is happening a lot, where parents are teaching their Black children that they potentially are going to face systemic structural racism, and there's a different expectation for you when you interact with an officer than a white person.
There
and
is
I
a
think
different expectation. Absolutely.
a reality.
And you better teach your kids. Sorry, I'm sorry, Liz.
No. I mean, those discussions are really, really hard to have, because I think it forces parents to have to say, racism exists, you are going to be treated differently, there's a different set of expectations, and basically here's how to keep yourself safe. I agree that those conversations need to happen. I think they're really tough, emotionally tough conversations to have.
Lynette, I'll come back to you. I wanted to go to Lorenza. I think you were going to say something. Were you?
Yes, thank you. I'm a 68-year-old African-American male, and I can remember 30 years ago driving across the country from California to Oklahoma, getting stopped 5 times on the freeway because every time there's a white police officer that had no justification. And I did teach my kids 30 years ago, both hands on the steering wheel. Yes, sir, no, sir. I'm reaching in the glove compartment to get my wallet, blah, 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 blah. It's time that the police force, and in all respect to my brothers here in the position that you're in, need to be educated on the 21st century African-American male.
Absolutely.
And just sitting back, saying yes, sir, no, sir, and staying in line. These young men, they've been freed. They've been educated.
Absolutely.
You know, and they're not going to respond to the status quo that this country has held African-American men to. So yes, I've been educating my sons for years, and they're educating their sons. But are we on the other side educating the police force to who the 21st century African-American male is and his behaviors? Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's a good point.
But we shouldn't even have to educate our sons and daughters. I shouldn't have to tell my daughters, don't take that toy into the grocery store because I don't want someone to think that you stole it. It shouldn't be a matter of us having to educate our children. How come people just cannot see someone and say, you're a human being and I'm not going to harm you? How come still in 2020, a Black man and a Black man's value is pretty much worthless? I think that's the question. I'm tired of teaching my kids this.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Can I say something, Geraldine?
Absolutely.
I totally agree. Even like I said, when I was in the academy, we're taught different things, but one thing that what wasn't taught is how to interact with the community. I can remember growing up as a kid, and we had police officers that came through the neighborhood, handed out football cards and things like that. We've lost that community interaction. I mean, with me even being a police officer, there's times that I'm driving and, yeah, I'm a police officer, but I'm always full aware of, okay, I see this cop behind me. I'm rolling in Overland Park. I'm rolling in Olathe. Most cops don't care if you're a police officer. You can still get stopped and you can show them your credentials and things like that, but they don't care. I mean, there's just a lot of evil that's in the world, and it's hard to deal with that to find out where this is coming from. But I think we've lost the community, and the police have lost because now you see police driving around and they're just wanting to stop you. Police officers we're here to help and serve, but it hasn't gone that way. And I think a lot of it is, like I said, educating. I know the lady said that, why should we do it? Why do we have to? Well, we have to. We all have to be educated. We all have to keep growing. I think TV, and I'm getting into something that people probably not gonna like, but we're getting into TV, people portraying to be something that they're not. These images that are being put out, it puts a label, and we've been labeled for many years as, you know, the low part of the totem pole, and we're the scum because we got rappers talking about killing people and talking about women, and they want to do the. I mean, that's just the images that are portrayed, and that's because parents have not taught their kids to live the right way, and some of them do, and some of them go astray. But it's the media, it's the TV, it's what Black men are doing on television. It's with them walking around with their pants hanging down, and they think it's cool, and it's really heartbreaking.
Azandi, I think what Dr. Sparkman Barnes was saying is that why is it that Black parents have to teach their Black kids, but white parents don't have to? Why is this happening? I think that's, and I know that she knows the answer to that, and I think that we all know it, but I think the point that she's trying to drive home is that it's not fair that this is something that we have to do. I do want to point to the chat. There's a lot of really good discussion that's happening in the chat. It's amazing what's going on. And I want to take maybe one comment, and then I want to go to Dr. Mabachi so that she can talk about how we can all be socially accountable. So is there anyone from the chat or online who wants to say something?
Yeah, Dr. McGee, this is Dr. Samuel, Kansas State.
Hi there.
How you doing, colleague? Thank you so much for allowing my Kansas State University colleagues and others to join in this conversation. I believe it's very important that we have this opportunity to connect and dialogue with KU Med and the Kansas City community of practitioners, because so many of our students are particularly African-American students, hail from that piece of the state. I want to go back to the piece about the cell phone being the big enemy of police officers. And I got to say that I strenuously disagree with that.
I do too.
I believe that to take that particular ideology is to allow those officers and other officers, and I'm not talking about all officers, but officers who are committing homicide, other poor acts of judgment and professionalism. I believe it's letting them off the hook. And you know, we've seen this time and time again. Many of us can go back to Rodney King days and even beyond, the gentleman in New York who was shot 41 times. And it doesn't seem to matter in many cases when there is good video evidence. And the officer said, we don't know all the circumstances. And that's true. But we do have better information today, given the technology and everything that's available today that was not available previously in these times. But even with that, it still doesn't mean anything. Officers are committing these acts in front of audiences, knowing full well they are being audio recorded, they're being video recorded, and with a full faith and confidence that they will be able to do these things with impunity. They will not be brought up on charges. They will not be terminated, more often than not anyway, from their jobs. And that in and of itself is where this narrative has to change. We need more commissioners and captains and officers in the police forces and partners to hold their brethren accountable when these things happen. Those 3 officers who did not have their knee on the neck of Mr. Floyd are just as culpable in my mind, because they sat there and they watched him do it.
Absolutely.
They watched him do it for nearly 15 minutes. That man said over and over he could not breathe. He wasn't resisting, right? He wasn't putting up a fight. He didn't have a weapon. And as far as they know, he hadn't committed a crime. He was drugged out of his car on the suspicion of committing a crime. Not that they had any idea that he had actually committed a crime. And that crime that he was suspected of was a non-violent a crime in and of itself. They could have given him a citation. They could have simply taken the man to custody. I mean, they could have done 1,000 different things, and despite knowing that the world was watching, they still took that young man's life. And so anything that we do to let people off the hook, those gentlemen, if you can call them gentlemen in Georgia, that held that jogger up and killed Aubrey, they need to be held accountable and spend the rest of their lives in prison. And anyone who is available or lend themselves to doing those type of things have got to be held accountable, whether they are officers of the law or not. If I had done that, I'd be doing life in prison.
Thank you, Brian. Really
I
good
want to
point.
just ask a really quick question that might help us lead into talking a little bit more about social accountability from Natty. All of these comments and discussion is so great. I feel like we need like 5 hours. And the chat is also—
The chat is amazing.
full of incredible
Yeah.
information. So as far as social accountability, the video of George Floyd, I think Captain Gibson said, I watched it twice. I don't want to watch it again. I feel exactly the same way. I felt like I was watching a death happen. And I work in cancer around death and dying all day, every day. And I thought it was traumatic to watch that video in its entirety. But if you're a bystander watching all those people, there was a first responder, off-duty firefighter saying like, hey, check his pulse. Hey, he's not moving. Hey, he's not responding. Hey, he needs help. Is there really, from the officer's standpoint and from a social accountability standpoint, if I'm observing and watching something happen as a bystander that I think maybe is wrong, I don't know, I'm not a police officer, but what I'm watching is like, this is disturbing. Is there really anything that a bystander can do? Because I feel like you're going to get yourself in trouble if you start trying to intervene with what the police are trying to do. So is there anything a bystander can do if they see something happening with the police that they feel is not right?
I would say just
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Z. Go ahead.
I would say to me, there's not a lot that a bystander can do. As we've seen, when they're trying to videotape, or they see the young man or young whoever getting harmed. I mean, there's things that they really can't do. I would, other than calling the police department and saying, hey, there are 2 or 3 of your officers here and they're unlawfully, hurting this man or whatever. They can do that. But I mean, as an officer, I mean, to me, where's your morals? I mean, to come in, I mean, if you see this young man that's being hurt and harmed, I mean, you should be able to tell your fellow officer, hey, that's enough. That's
Right.
enough.
Yeah, I want
but
to.
I don't think
Azandi,
they want to do that.
Right, Azandi, that's a great point. I want to Natty, for Natty to talk about how we can all be social accountability, but I want to open it up to our white individuals who, you guys know me, I'm very intentional about diversity, equity, inclusion, to open up to white individuals to get your thoughts about what's happening, and Natty, and then talk about how we can all be socially accountable. Anyone?
I mean, this is Kisa. I feel in watching videos ashamed. And so there, obviously it is completely different, my view and my feelings when I see stuff like this, but I feel the same. I've seen the video once or twice and I don't want to see it again because I feel extremely ashamed. And I feel, when you talk about a little bit with the education, that it puts an impetus on me to educate my children. And to make sure that my children understand and know their place and where not only, respect and diversity, but also how to stand up for other people as well. And how, I don't really know the best thing, and hopefully we've got some good suggestions, but, I feel the same need to educate, obviously not on the same side of it. I don't fear for my children, but I fear for the world they're in if this is what is happening.
Right, Natty. Thank you, Kisa.
Great. Thanks for all this really interesting discussion. I talk a lot about how to move from being socially responsible to socially accountable, because I think we need to have an explicit discussion about the structures of oppression. There are always going to be people who are racist, who are bigots, who are prejudiced. But they will continue to do so because they have structures around them that allow them to continue to do so. There's structures around them that are invested in maintaining the status quo that has been going on in this country for hundreds of years. And so when I talk about social accountability, some of my guiding assumptions are this: whether or not we bear any responsibility for crafting societal institutional isms, racism, sexism, homophobia, it is all of our responsibilities to eradicate it. And challenging isms and privilege is everyone's work. And we can't get away from the fact that all of us have implicit biases, but these biases can be unlearned, these biases can be worked on, and it's a continual process. And it can be addressed through work internally, individually, relationally, organizationally, and through our communities. And we really need to understand that building relationships across difference is not the same as confronting systems of oppression. Both are needed to happen at the same time. So we should ask ourselves, are we socially accountable individuals or organizations? And what do I mean by this? A lot of this work is adapted from Bolin, and I can send you guys the link if you're interested. There are many individuals and organizations who are socially responsible. So we are aware of our responsibility to do good, to respond to the needs of community, to be community oriented. And we try and ensure that our internal processes are reflecting that responsibility. So that's if we're socially responsible. If we're socially responsive as individuals, we enact good deeds. So we go beyond just thinking, yeah, I should do good. So we do readings, we attend seminars, we attend community conversations. As organizations, and KU is really good at this, we implement interventions to address inequities. We have data-driven objectives and competencies, and we try and really ensure that our outcomes are focused to where we are benefiting the communities that we work for. Very few people and organizations are socially accountable. And so if we're looking at it from an individual perspective, as individuals, we're not merely living good lives outwardly, but we're doing so in our homes, through the language we use daily, the ways we're involved in our communities, where we invest our money, where we live, where we send our children to school, the organizations we choose to work for, the relationships we choose to develop, maintain, or terminate. And as an organization, we can call ourselves socially accountable if our organizational objectives are actually defined by the community, by the people who work in the organization, by the communities we served. We're not merely checking off boxes and competencies. We're actually interested in long-term impact rather than short-term impact. We are creating employees who are change agents, so who are doing good within their organizations, but also within their wider community. If we're socially accountable or people and organizations, we are calling for equity and healing at all levels of the society, not just at individual level, but community, organizational. And we're promoting people's whole being. So do we allow for people to come to spaces, for example, for our fellow workmates to come and be their whole selves, their authentic selves in the workplace? We're socially accountable if we enact transformative equity. And transformative equity calls for confronting, recognizing, addressing social, historical, and spiritual suffering. One of the things that really sort of gets me is when people say, slavery is in the past, forget about it. We cannot ignore history. Equity calls us to recognize the non-dominant groups, Native Americans, African Americans, Latinx, women. We're still dealing with the legacy of exclusion, marginalization, policing, oppression, exploitation. And anybody who denies that, I suspect, is invested either knowingly or unknowingly in the continuation of the structures that have benefited them for centuries. We are socially accountable if we understand our privileges and our power and the differences therein between different people in our communities and our organizations. We're socially accountable if we move from having comfortable conversations, so conversations where my reality is being agreed with, to courageous conversations where I expect and invite my reality to be challenged. We are socially accountable if we ask the questions: who is in the room? Who is trying to get in the room but can't? Whose presence in the room is under constant threat? Has everyone's ideas been heard? Even then, whose ideas won't be taken seriously? Is this environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? Whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized to allow others to be comfortable? We are truly socially accountable if we make what we're doing in our lives a true practice and not just a checklist. Some people may not agree with this, but the system really isn't broken. It's working as intended.
It's working as intended.
It's working as intended.
Mm-hmm.
They will use, and so it really takes a lot of work for us to look at that system, to interrogate it, and to ask mindful and reflective questions that are based on root causes, so history, trauma, that are based in social justice and equity. So are we, for example, at KU, embracing inclusion, not just because it makes business sense, because it does, and there's a lot of research to show it does, but because there's a moral imperative at hand as an organization for us to make sure that everybody feels safe and that people feel empowered and people feel like there's equity at work. Are we promoting the psychological safety of our employees? So we are socially accountable if we always remember that equity and empowerment is key. Community support, community input, recognizing oppressed groups, making sure that their voices are being heard, making sure we recognize history, making sure we recognize continued trauma that Liz talked about, and most importantly, making sure that those structures are being thoroughly interrogated. And in some cases, I call for totally dismantling and building up again in order to ensure that everybody feels safe, everybody has equal opportunity, everybody's voice is being heard. And I can talk ad nauseum about this, but that's sort of the difference between being a socially responsible individual organization and moving towards being a socially accountable individual and organization.
Thank you for that, Natty. Liz, I know you may have to leave, and Natty, I'm not sure if you need to get off, but for anyone who needs to go, I totally understand. Natty, and yeah, anyone else on the line, what can we do moving forward from this day forward? What can we do? Because I think many of us feel, some of us may feel powerless and like we can't do anything. What can we do as individuals to move forward to help with these issues? And I'm speaking Black people, but also white people, brown people, all of us. What can we do?
So I'm really glad you asked that question, because one of the things Liz and I talked about that we think is really important is to talk about this concept of hope and the science of the positive. And I think that promoting equity empowerment, decolonization calls for active hope. And there's this researcher called Joanne Macy who studied social justice and social justice movements around the world. And she's sort of come up with 3 ways that we can enact active hope. One of it is deconstructing and eliminating harm. One of the things we do at KU is we do a lot of implicit bias training. That's one of an example of how to practically do that. So understanding and mitigating our implicit biases on an individual and organizational level. Another thing is promoting life-sustaining healing actions. So that involves actually recognizing historical trauma and incorporating that into our processes, our policies, the way we do the work that we do, the way we interact with our patients, our students, and with each other. So take a really close and honest look at how we as an organization are promoting the safety of our employees. And then a shift in consciousness. So how are we shifting the language that we use? Mm-hmm. You know, how we interrogating the norms around how we behave, not just at work, but in our communities. Because, you know, these people behave the way they behave because they feel like they can. It's as simple as that. So, and I can say a lot more about that, but hope and the positive is not an abstract concept. I think it's real, it's measurable, it's a strategy that can be motivating and powerful. What if we dare to experience and express hope, even in the most challenging of times? What if we express hope and allow it to eclipse our fears, to challenge all this awfulness that is happening, to make sure that the continual assault and marginalization on Black bodies and Black and brown bodies doesn't continue? What if we use hope to find allyship, gratitude, joy, solutions? And also for me, collective hope, what I call Care Bear hope. I don't know if any of you guys remember the Care Bears.
Yes.
I think it discourages apathy. And to me, apathy is death of the possible. So I think that we really need to keep that in the back of our minds as we, yeah, the Care Bear stare, exactly, in the back of our minds as we start challenging and hopefully dismantling and interrogating this in our private lives, in our departments, at the upper levels of our, you know, of administration at KU and sort of wider. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Well said, Nettie. I'm so glad that you brought that up because I know we were like, this is going to be heavy. We got to end with something that is a little bit encouraging.
Yes.
And hopelessness is very paralyzing. And I think, you know, you summed it up very well. And it's a realistic place that we fall into, understandably so, but I think it's a place that we don't want to get stuck in.
Absolutely. Right. Is there anyone else that wants to chime in on how we can move forward? Jill?
Yeah, I'm wondering, you know, so I've taught, and I know Dr. McGee, you've taught our nursing students cultural competency. And I know we teach it differently now because we address some of these issues around dominant groups and privilege and everything. But you know, I have so many thoughts in my head, I'm not being very articulate.
Okay.
It seems like we have to be very intentional in the education that we're providing. Like I don't think we have in our nursing programs content about colonialism. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about white supremacy as a structure that influences health inequities. And so it seems like there is a gap in what our students are learning. And certainly I don't remember from my high school education, which was years ago, I think what I was taught in terms of American history was very skewed. And so it seems that we have a responsibility to integrate this into our curricula for our students, because when we think about social determinants of health and being able to address them, addressing them at the individual level is good. I'm glad that we're thinking about screenings now, but that's putting a Band-Aid on the bigger issue. And
the root cause for many of these issues is a society that has benefited from white supremacy. And so how do we address that collectively? And is there can we at least begin with making sure that this is in our education for our students and for us, but to be very intentional about that.
Is it Jill who just spoke?
Jill.
Yes, yes.
Hi, Jill.
Hi.
I mean, you just asked the $1 million question, right? And that is something that my colleague, Dr. Maria Alonso, and I have been struggling with the med school curriculum. We were the threadhead for, I was social determinants of health and she was culture and diversity. And we went through the whole curriculum and sort of tried to intentionally infuse a lot of these concepts into the lectures that we're providing to our med students. Unfortunately, I think they were unable to sort of integrate it in a way that, or to the level that we thought it should. We understand that there are other priorities, etc. But I have to tell you that every single time we spoke, students were like, why haven't we heard this before? Why hasn't this been incorporated in what we're learning? This shouldn't just be a one-time thing. We should have this throughout our whole curriculum. So it's not just about us as educators being intentional about how we're sort of integrating this in a meaningful way in our curriculum. But it's also that our students are hungry for this information. And we're not doing a very good job of responding to it. So we're producing a bunch of students and professionals who I think aren't equipped to deal in this world as we see it today and truly serve our patients to the best, to the level that they need.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I know that there's been a few of us, Jill and I and Dina, and actually Dr. Alonso, we've talked about a course talking about this. And I think that it needs to be an interprofessional course and to give the students what they need in order to be good stewards in society and also help take care of the population. So I think that it's something that we need to do. And we've just made that decision. So it is 1:58. Thank you all so much. I think this is a conversation that we need to continue. I appreciate you all, appreciate your thoughts. Thank you, Captain Gibson. Thank you, Officer Garlington, for being here with us today to provide that other perspective, because it's so important to have all of the perspectives so we can see it from many different angles. Thank you all so much for a great conversation, and we'll have to do this again soon. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Great job.
Thanks.
Thanks, Geraldine.
Yeah,
thank
you, Geraldine.
Thank you for coming.
Bye, Liz.
Yeah, we'll have to do this again. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Great conversation.
It was. Thank you, Z.
You're welcome.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Alexa.
You're welcome.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.